give you a pop quiz at the end of this. Hopefully you can pass it on aquaculture. All right, so thank you for joining us again. It's so far I think it's been a really great course. We've learned a lot of things about marine aquaculture. And tonight you're going to learn a little bit more from the investor side and from a business standpoint why someone would want to invest in marine aquaculture. Christy Walton is the co-founder of Cuna Del Mar. Cuna Del Mar is an investment group seeing opportunities to support and develop open ocean aquaculture methods that are economically viable as well as environmentally and socially responsible. They invest in businesses that have the potential to create disruption in the industry by being positive change agents to produce a diverse supply of healthy and wholesome seafood. Their company portfolio includes Earth Ocean Farms, Open Blue, and Rose Canyon Fisheries, which you will also hear about later tonight. So please join me in welcoming Christy Walton.
Thank you for having me. Let's see, I've done this before. Cuna Del Mar was founded to invest in the development of environmentally friendly and sustainable offshore open ocean aquaculture with underwater cage systems. So below surface, there's one of them on that second slide from the left, and we just saw. What is that called?
Science on a Sphere.
A Science on a Sphere. We saw one of our other cage technologies on that. So, aquaculture is really the investment opportunity of the 21st century. We have 2.4 billion extra people and no more land, and how do we feed them? That's all coming. Currently, fish provide more than 1.5 billion people with almost 20% of their average per capita intake of protein. And should I read through these with you, or I really haven't done these presentations before. Human per capita consumption of seafood is growing from 9.9 in 1960 to 17.2 in 2009, and a lot more than that now. Wild fisheries have reached or exceeded their maximum sustainable harvest. Over 80% of fisheries are overexploited, depleted, or in recovery. And the United Nations has identified an annual 40+ million ton seafood gap. That's probably a metric ton by 2030 if there's no growth in aquaculture. We've already hit a record high of fish consumption, seafood consumption, and I think that includes shellfish and crustaceans. So we see aquaculture as a solution. A long time ago, we quit treating the terrestrial part of Earth, the Earth part of Earth, as hunter-gatherers. We began domesticating and farming, and yet we're still treating the sea as though it were a big prairie that we could just hunt bison on forever. With the supply of wild-caught fish stagnant, any future increase in world fish consumption will need to be supplied by aquaculture. In a resource-constrained world, this includes freshwater and feed. Aquaculture and saltwater aquaculture is the most attractive option for expanding the animal protein supply. Farm finfish are better at feed conversion efficiency than poultry, much more efficient than beef, pigs, other animals. Because the aquaculture sector is relatively young compared with terrestrial livestock sectors, it offers a great scope for technical innovation and further increased resource efficiency. With technology and awareness, we should be able to feed ourselves and honor our planet at the same time. Cuna Del Mar is investing in a portfolio of companies to address some of these challenges. Our office fund is investing in the future. In open ocean aquaculture, technology is huge. We need a lot of technology development to farm in an open ocean and to farm underwater. We have investments in US, Canada, Mexico, and Panama. And this company was created out of concern for food security and the environmental sustainability of our oceans. When I first saw the first offshore underwater pen, I thought, oh my goodness, we can create a commercial enterprise that is also a no-take zone, and that you have a right to the pen. So, and in many, no one's going to trawl through your farm. 91% of U.S. edible seafood supplies are imported. Seafood imports account for $14 billion of the annual trade deficit. It's the second largest contributor to that deficit, other than oil, which may have changed some. But consumers spend $91 billion on fishery products in 2012. World's wild fisheries are capped at 80 to 90 million metric tons per year. Traditional aquaculture has multiple challenges to growth. Inshore farms. We need upwards of 100 million metric tons annually of additional marine protein within the next 20 years. And how do we do that? One point I want to make, just going back a little bit on that importing, the fish that we import, the seafood that we import is, our consumption is, our largest consumption is in shrimp. That's the highest for salmon. So our wild fisheries, I think the majority of that wild fishery goes to be ground up for shrimp farms. And they're not a nice thing. They're raised in very concentrated, unhealthy conditions. We have estuaries worldwide. Mangroves are gone because of shrimp farming and poor practices, a lot of disease. Less than 2% of that importation of that, I call it the cockroach of the sea, is tested. It's got a lot of antibiotics in it. It's high in copper, which is really not good for you to eat at the levels that are in it. And I'm afraid we just haven't thought about the environmental footprint of it, the environmental footprint of sending the salmon offshore to be processed and then re-importing it. 16 large cargo ships equal all of the car exhaust in the world. So when you start adding that up, you wonder about the contribution to acidification of the seas from all that sulfuric acid of the ships burning the bunker fuel. So we've got a lot of environmental issues around the way we have allowed our fisheries to degrade. I'll go on here. I've been reading a great book called American Catch that I recommend to anyone who's interested in this. So it focuses on three fish, the salmon, the oyster, what's the other one? the main three fish that were developed to, that really changed our fisheries here. Anyway, we're interested in changing that, in shifting between current inshore aquaculture practices and the wild fisheries to something that's kind of a combination with the offshore fishing currents, fish that never see the same water twice. So we have in Cuna Del Mar portfolio, we have open blue sea farms in Panama. This has the largest hatchery in Central America, and certainly probably the only green lead hatchery in the world. Certainly it is in South America and the US. We have Earth Ocean Farms I'm sorry, in Panama we raise cobia. In Earth Ocean Farms in Baja, that's an early stage farm, and we are raising tuclava, an endangered species. We have a special luma for that fish, and we're working on the code for the red snapper, the true red snapper. Here in California, we're applying for permits for Rose Canyon fisheries, and I'll let Don tell you about that. We have a marketing company, Open Blue Global Services in Canada, and Overseas Systems, which is a merger of two offshore underwater farm technologies, and Sol Azul, which is an oyster farm in the Biosphere Reserve of San Ignacio Lagoon in Mexico. This is the Aquapod, this first one, the geodesic sphere. That's the farm in Mexico. By the way, it was on a PBS special series this winter called Earth is the New Wild, and it's in the oceans segment of that. And then we have the Ocean Spar technology, which is the larger farm based in Panama. That's not nearly halfway out of the water yet. So you can see it's about 120 feet across and 90 feet tall. It's like a spindle. So we want to enable open ocean mariculture to be a part of feeding the world high quality protein and preserving livestock. And our mission is to create innovative and integrated production systems that efficiently and effectively produce fish while not harming the environment. In Overseas Systems, the objective is to build highly automated, technically advanced, efficient, financially viable offshore open ocean total farm operating systems. There's Aquapod, and that's about like the first one I bought. So they said, well, it looks like a Christmas ornament. We can paint it gold. Beautiful thing. There you can see a part of the cage system still underwater. I don't know that that's the largest one, but the reverse of that, it's just the same top and bottom. This is some of the innovations in the system that we've been working on. You can see there the single, double rim, and the aquapod. And we're really after dodger-free harvesting. In all of our, we haven't had any major accidents on any of our farms, but we do have too much dive time that we're really working on reducing. And so far with the sea station, we have the mortality removal and submerged water-based delivery and feeding systems. A new feeding system just came this week that's beautiful. In Mexico, we have a 10-pin grid system with the Aquapod. In Panama, we have one 10-pin grid and one 12-pin grid. And the node spar, central feeding power, power supply and data. In Hawaii, that's a farm that uses our technology, and they're working with the copper alloy mesh, which is beautiful. It really reduces the growth on the cages, and it's an 8-pin grid system, and it has the ancillary operational equipment, nursery nets, feeding, harvesting. In new species, we're working with the cobia in Panama. There are very few institutions that are working on and developing finfish that you can actually farm. Don Kent with Hubs Research is one, and Daniel Benetti in Florida is the other. I think that's about it in the United States. Other countries have more. Mexico has more than we do. The open ocean farming platform is working toward creating consistent, healthy seafood supply. And this particular farm is 12 kilometers offshore in a very active sea. waves are typically 2 to 3 meters. You can see the current there on the buoys. It can be up to 3 knots. And these are the two grid systems with 22 sea stations between them. This is the cobia. This is the largest offshore producer of cobia, and with a fully integrated supply chain from the hatchery from breeding through the hatchery to the customer. And that includes the processing. We try to stay away from GMO feed, and we have about double the omega-3s, the EPA and DHA content of farmed salmon. We're one of the healthiest fish you can eat with Muscovia. And the market can be about 20 times that of salmon. This fish grows to about 11, 12 pounds in a year, which is wonderful. You can see 4 of the cages here are on the surface, and there are 18 submerged. This is the hatchery, some of the hatchery. Here, this is really large. And I don't think in that photo that all the tanks, this is taken before the hatchery was finished. Baby fish are amazing. This is the processing plant. Getting the product to market. We ended up creating our own marketing company to market some of these products. And that's Open Blue Global Services. I think we're shipping into Asia now and Europe, US, and we're opening the market in Mexico. Our vision, where we're going, to feed current and future generations in harmony with the ocean. And getting there is by creating innovative and responsible open ocean mariculture products and solutions that respect the ocean and enrich lives. Caring about both ocean and human health. An unhealthy ocean is really hard for the human, and an unhealthy human population is the same for the ocean. Sol Azul is our oyster farm in Laguna San Ignacio. You can see it from Google Earth. And it uses a method of farming instead of hanging bags that you see so often. These are on racks. So these oysters are exposed twice a day, and they learn how to shut and hold their moisture inside. So they ship better than the ones that are always in the water. When you take them out, they go, and everything, well, they lose their moisture content. So these don't do that, which is good because the farm's very remote. It takes a bit of getting to market. We're working on the really deep, fast flash freezing of them. Taste profile tests say that they taste actually better than the fresh oyster. And maybe that's because most oysters have been out of the water a few days before you actually get them. They're not as, it's just not, you don't get them the same few hours after you have harvested them, which you can do with flash freezing. We just sent our second container to China for this oyster. Actually, they were up here at a seafood show last weekend. Sol Azul was. And we have our own hatchery and nursery, and we're working in this advanced genetics program. As oceans change and heat up, most seed stock comes from Chile, and we're working with seed stock that we're breeding with the university from inside the Baja, that are used to the high water temperatures so that we don't have the mortalities when we have those hot water events that we have had in the past. This is a beautiful, pristine site. San Ignacio Lagoons where the whales go to calve. So this is Earth Ocean Farms again. Whale sharks like it. In Panama, we have a whale shark named Lucy, and she's about 35 feet long.
Christy, how long would that little shark be? Any idea? The
15.
octopus, 15?
That's a small that's a little aquapod. That's probably a 15-foot shark. But Lucy's about 35.
No, we work with whale sharks. I don't think we've seen one that small.
Mhm.
The big unknowns is where the unknowns.
We're seeing them there in off of La Paz. This is the hatchery. This is a small hatchery. We haven't gone to really large commercial scale in Mexico yet. We're still working on species development with the Tuala, and that's a broodstock Tuala there. They grow almost as fast as the cobia, which is wonderful. Their food conversion ratio is very good. That's the 12 juveniles, eggs. This is an aquapod with 30,000 foot lava babies. We're working on the red snapper larvae. It's really interesting. They have to develop a mouth so quickly. Just within a couple of days, they have to have a mouth and start eating from hatching out of an egg. That's the red snapper. I think this is the fish that's the most, it's in the market. It's mismarketed.
Yeah, a lot of people call a lot of different things red snapper, but this is the
real red
real
snapper. Lucianus Berlin. Rose Canyon Fisheries, yellowtail white sea bass, first species. This is the location of the farm. Off of La Jolla, we call it Rose Canyon because I think it's on the Rose Canyon Fault. And the intention is to help California, actually the U.S., rebuild the seafood industry. We've lost it. We import 90% of what we eat. 55% of that plus is farm. And we want to bring American fisheries back. We're behind the rest of the world. We're very, very far behind. And we have some of the best coastline and open ocean for farming. %91 are imported, for 92 as well. Most of our seafood that we do raise is exported. Most of our wild caught is exported. Wild caught is exported again to our feeding of Alaska. The solution is to rebuild the U.S.-based supply of seafood to ensure future food safety and food security. We could be self-sustaining and environmentally sustainable in our seafood supply. Our initial partnership between Hub SeaWorld Research Institute and Cuna del Mar is to secure permits to build a 5,000 metric ton proof of concept farm off of San Diego. It's an 18 plus month plus permitting process, close to $2 million to get a permit. I would say it's much longer. How long was, we purchased your research, that was, how many years?
We spent 9 years developing what we ended up trying to get permitted.
So it's a 10-year process. And I don't know what your initial costs were, but that's not a fish in the water, that's not a cage, that's not a farm, that's a permit. Maybe. I'll let John tell the story. These are 5 of the many. There are more regulatory elements. And they all have their own fiefdoms or towers or whatever you want to call it. They don't talk much to each other. They all want different things. Some of them the same thing that you've done for one, you have to redo for the other. Challenges are the absence of regulatory frameworks, the time and cost, public and NGO perceptions of aquaculture, even though they're eating it from other countries. Public ocean or marine spatial planning, the whole world needs that. Cost and time of developing new species and reliable fingerling supply. We have these species, Don has more, but that only 2 institutions in the US even work on it is a little frightening. You can't just develop a species in a year, or 2 years, or 3 years. You've got to take it through all of its life stages. It has different nutritional needs at different stages of its life. Different things, other things in the ocean affect it. Some things you would never imagine are out there. So there's just a whole lot to it. Processing protocols and infrastructure, we've lost a lot of the infrastructure we used to have. Very little R&D, as I was saying. We need scale. Personally, I think that the government should be investing in this, just from a food security aspect. And well, we point out algae, which is the base of the seafood chain. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars for biofuel research in algae and nothing on feed. Algae for feed, which I think would replace a lot of fish oil. It's the base of the fish food chain. There is live animals. Nature, it's the ocean. Stuff happens. You don't know. You can have currents in one place at depth going 3 different directions. Currents change. Hurricane event can reverse an entire huge section of the sea, reverse the direction of the current. We've had that happen. Moving away from an industrialized model and more to the industrialized healthy fish model. Biology, quality control, disease. There's a lot of innovation. There's so much we don't know. Geopolitics, changing regulatory frameworks and standards, and lack of control of the entire food, the entire supply chain. Marketing, bringing new species into the public consciousness and willingness to try. Ability to develop a brand. You've got to brand that fish. The investments are huge. We need those alternate feeds that are feeds based on, for me, aquatic-based animals need aquatic-based feeds, land-based animals need land-based feeds. We don't need to be feeding our fish to chickens, dogs, cats, cows, pigs. We need to be feeding our fish to fish. We're going to be feeding it to any other animal other than a human. There are very few people exploring this. I've only been in this for 6 years. And that's amazing. People think I know what I'm doing. I'm just out there experimenting. And, you know, it's a long-term payback. If you ever get paid back when you're breaking into a new territory, when you're the first, it's always better to be second. You know, you can learn a lot by being second from the first. So it's as with any animal, it's not like a .com. You're not going to make billions of dollars in a few years. It's a different mindset. We are going to need that protein, and it is going to come from somewhere if we're going to survive. We think it needs to be largely from fish, and we want healthier oceans. We can't just keep treating it like that prairie. And we've got to do something about the acidification and the other things that are going on because of our pollution. We could grow local and closer to the market. I mean, it was surprising. We had a meeting with the San Diego City Council. They had no idea. The Port Authority. They had no idea that the fish they were eating didn't come from San Diego. They weren't eating fish from San Diego. They were eating imported fish. I think you scared them, dog. Yeah. And we need those technology developments. Improving the productivity and environmental performance of aquaculture and ensuring it provides safe, environmentally sustainable, affordable, nutritious food to millions of people around the world. It's an important item on the menu for a sustainable food future. I think I was reading an analysis recently in one of the aquaculture magazines. Only 60% care what they eat, what people care about it. Well, that's 40% who do care. But there's a lot of ignorance about what you're eating. So it's good that you're learning about it, thinking about it, and asking questions. I'll answer whatever ones I can if you have some.
Christy, you mentioned a quote from Peter Drucker. And probably some people here don't know that Peter Drucker was one of the great leader management gurus and wrote a lot of books on leadership. And it was about 2002, and he made the statement that fish farming and not the internet will be the 21st century's most promising investment opportunity. Do you think maybe he meant the 22nd century?
I hope not. I hope not. Yes.
Christy, why do you think not a lot of people are investing like big projects like you're investing on? I mean, it's clear that the U.S. The incentive is the deficit, and it's in the U.S.'s interest to do something about it. But why isn't anybody else or any big relevant group out there?
Well, we don't have a relevant group in the U.S. In other countries like Norway, I think we push their envelope, and that's what they said. That salmon industry knows it has to go offshore, just not right now. And we're pushing them. I mean, this technology development is pushing them. We have a ways to go with the technology development. I would like to see more investment in it. I would like to see government invest in it. I think Don said NOAA has, $7 million, and yet on Google News today, you see that the Department of Defense spent $9 million on football games patriotism. So there's something broken here. Yes.
How many of your farms are demonstration projects, and how many of them are financially making money?
None of them make money. No, the investment's too big.
What do you think?
At this point, the Panama farm, the Cobia farm, would make money in 3 years. At the end of 3 years, if we scale it, when we scale it, and we're looking for investment partners in that at this time. It's ready to scale. The hatchery's there. The systems are there. I held the farm back I held the farm back for 2 years from scaling until we developed better technology. And, you know, you really want to harvest underwater, you want to feed underwater, you want to have a cleaning system underwater, a lot of robotics and camera systems, all of that we didn't know what we didn't know until we got out into the ocean. So that farm, I've been in it now, I think 6 years, going on 7, and held it back for 2 years. We scaled it significantly and realized we needed our own processing, we needed our own trucking. For instance, we're in the middle of harvest in Panama and they tripled the cost of the processing. So you know, you're in countries where sometimes contracts don't mean much. So it's been like that, and now this farm's ready to go. And in Mexico, I'm not sure of the technology that we'll use, but we still want to develop the Tutuaba a little bit further in our own hatchery. And secure our position with that fish because it is an endangered species. Mexican government changes a lot. We've had issues with people who didn't really understand aquaculture and held our farm back for 2 years. So a lot of it's education of officials and public.
Congratulations, you've gone a long way.
Yeah, thank you. Yes?
So in spite of all those challenges, it's still just way more cost effective to try it down there than it is to even.
When it's close to $2 million in 10 years for a permit here, when you have so many, the farm left, the open blue cobia used to be called Christy Ocean or something?
Snapper farm.
Snapper farm, and it was in
Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico. And the competing U.S. government agencies, I call them competing because they don't talk to each other and they all have their things they want you to do. And redundancies and interference with the ability to actually farm caused the farm to go to Panama. You know, we really need to streamline our government and have one set of protocols, one agency that you deal with, not 5 or 6, that sometimes ask you to do the same thing and don't accept each other's data. So and we're in Mexico, and Mexico has more investment in development of species than the U.S. does. It has more, it actually has a system. We could have put this farm down by Ensenada for a couple of $100,000 in a year.
6 months.
6 months. We're only doing this to try to get the system to open up.
She's trying to kill me.
You know, because no one can do this. No business can actually come in and try to farm in the U.S.
And
When
you
it
think
takes
that
that
Rose
much.
Canyon might change the dynamics if you're
That's the
successful?
hope for the whole U.S. I mean, California for the whole U.S.
If you can do it in California,
You can do it anywhere.
anywhere.
And the agencies should know how to do it once it's done. One would hope.
How many years might it take Rose Canyon to be popular?
I'll let Don answer that question. Okay,
I
yes.
have a question. In terms of developing species, you were talking about, for instance, the code for the red snapper. I was wondering what code exactly you mean?
The ability, no one's been able to spawn that fish and take the fingerlings and have the little egg feed and grow into a fingerling successfully. We've managed to do that. And it's just an initial thing. I would say with that fish, we've got at least 3 years to go.
So how exactly do you do that to get it to do what you want it to do?
You do trial and error.
Is it breeding or is there any other?
No, it's feeding, it's like a baby, you know, it needs different nutritional needs at different times in its life. For a long time, people thought, well, the laying snapper, the rose spotted snapper, you can do that. That fish is commercially, it's Bob Miles has a farm in Costa Rica. That fish, they can take it all the way through the cycles. That was one of Daniel Benetti's students, and he studied that. He was able to do that fish because it was an easy fish he could catch. And he happened to hit the formula for it. With the red snapper, you would think, well, it's another snapper. It should be able to behave like the snapper in the same family, and it doesn't at all. People thought, well, the feed, the copepods or whatever they were too large, and it wasn't able to get it. Its mouth is smaller, so but that wasn't the issue. It eats entirely differently. Or its stomach would be full of those, but it wasn't able to digest them. So it's got to develop this, not only the mouth, the stomach, but the digestive system and the ability to move that through its body. And we don't know how to do that. We don't know how to do that with any fish when you start. You don't know what it eats. It's a wild thing, and we've never studied it. Yes?
This is just for my own curiosity. You said that you have in your grow out pens a morph removal.
Mortality.
Mortality removal. Is that like something that came about after you noticed more and more deaths?
Well,
occurring, or is
no,
it
it's
like
not more and more deaths, it's any death. And you always have death when you have 30,000 fish in a cage. And not so much with the Tutwaba, but when you're in a tropical warm sea, there are all kinds of bacteria and for instance, there are these little nettles that will attach to the Dyneema or the fabric nets, even the ones with the wire in them, and they sting the fish. And if enough of them do that and stress the fish, they just, you lose fish. I think there was a farm in Scotland that lost $3 million last summer of salmon from a jellyfish stinging them that came into the cages. So in that same warm sea, you have to get those mortalities out within hours, or you have bacteria in your whole cage, even if you're in the open ocean, but you're also a signal for sharks. So you have to get them out. And when you've got a spar that's 90 feet, if that cage is underwater and you've got to send a diver down that far, he hasn't got much time. You don't want to do it. You don't want to have him go down there and haul a dead fish out. So we have a system now to extract that from underwater from outside to the surface. We pump it out. And it's great because the little pufferfish like to congregate down there too, so we're pumping them out. Which is good. Well, there's that story. I've already told it a couple of times tonight. I'll tell you about the pufferfish. The pufferfish seem to bloom with the algae, and I think Kim made a good point that maybe the algae bloom feeds the pufferfish, which its liver is quite toxic. I forget what it's called in the sushi world, but if they get any of that liver on the knife or the other flesh, you're dead. Everybody at your table's dead. So this little pufferfish moves in to the cages to get out of the current. It's safe haven. Many critters move into the cages for safe haven. But our cobia at a certain size, and I think it's the 2 kilo size, eats them and dies. So we've lost serious amounts of that size fish if they're that size at the time of the algae blooms. So recently they did this experiment, and we have these large tanks for that kind of thing at the hatchery, and they put cobia of that size in the tanks, And then in the middle, they put another cage with pufferfish, and the cobia died. So it meant that they didn't have to eat that pufferfish. The pufferfish must exude a toxin when it's stressed. What science knows that? We learn a lot. We have a lot that could be shared with universities if there were interest. Yeah. But, and I say that toxin must have medical applications. Yeah, toxins do. Okay. Well, thank you all.
Let me get one final question.
Okay.
Other than Cuna Del Mar, are there any other companies making the efforts you are in the United States for offshore finfish aquaculture?
There's a gentleman that works with Icicle Seafoods. He started in Chile, and Icicle bought his company. He's up in the Seattle area running it. And the interest is there to invest. It's just they know they'll never get the permits to replicate the amount of salmon production that goes on in Chile here. So they de-incentivize the ability to invest in sustainable aquaculture.
I don't know if anybody's working in offshore technologies.
Not offshore, I mean, just even within what's existing within the marine environment, salmon farm.
I think Canada's just opened up again. Canada's just opened up to more farming. But the US, no.
I think we're very fortunate to have Cuna Del Mar being the pioneer in this, or it wouldn't be happening. Remember that there's a wonderful quote from Winston Churchill, that success is going from failure to failure without losing enthusiasm.
It's how we learn, huh?
That's how we learn, yes.
Those mistakes. All right. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
You would recognize. So our next speaker is Don Kent. Don has led the Hub SeaWorld Research Institute as president there since 1998. He went there in 1977 as a graduate student working on the growth characteristics of striped bass. He's participated in lots of projects since that time, everything from studying gray whales, assessing noise effects on animals, minimizing killer whale impacts on fishing operations, and of course his pet project is nurturing finfish aquaculture. And he's won lots of awards. He's been on numerous committees and commissions, and he is serving now as the pro tem CEO of the Rose Canyon Fisheries project, which he's going to tell us about. He's not an employee of that project, and he does not get paid directly for his services. He's also been a great friend of this aquarium's. He participates in this class. If you have seen the Science on a Sphere experience on aquaculture, he was a major advisor on that. He participated in the aquaculture forum that we had a number of months ago. So he's been a real asset to this aquarium. And we want to keep his activity just below the level where we would have to pay him. And please welcome Don Kent.
Thank you, Jerry. Yeah, Christy alluded to the idea that we've been doing this for a long time. When I graduated from UCSD, I started working in an aquaculture lab. It was run by San Diego State, but it was at Scripps. And it was interesting because it was the 70s. It was 1974 when I graduated, and aquaculture was going to be this great thing. I mean, we're going to feed the world with it. And I don't know where the hell that went from there, because it just kind of tunneled down. And I think what really happened was as we developed technologies, we gave them to other countries. So we started, salmon farming was actually invented in the U.S. We did it to replenish our stocks of salmon in rivers. We build a dam, build a hatchery down below, keep the salmon flowing. And the Norwegians picked up on that. They started doing it in Norway. Next thing you know is they're growing them all the way out, not just releasing them into their rivers, their fjords, they're growing them all the way out to eat them. Then the government's subsidizing bringing that salmon, putting it on Norwegian Airlines, flying it into New York City, and they're selling lox that's grown in farms and fjords in Norway in New York City. And the next thing you know is now they're investing, they come over and put farms in Puget Sound and grow Atlantic salmon in Puget Sound. Why fly to Filet if you can grow the fish here? So the initial investment in salmon farming was all made by the Norwegians. We looked at it and said, yeah, this would be great to do. But we didn't want to do it. We didn't want the industry to expand. So Chile said, we'll do it. So now Patagonia is full of cages growing salmon. Salmon don't live in Patagonia. They put them down there. And so you've got, now they're growing 500,000 metric tons a year of salmon in Patagonia. And it costs us 65 cents a pound to fly that back into our market. But the problem is the Brazilians are buying it all now. So they've got 65 cents to play with on the price point before, they have to worry about what we're going to pay for it. So we've kind of worked ourselves into a situation where 10 years ago when I was trying to do this, the commercial seafood industry was we're importing, that back then it was 84%, we're importing 84% of our seafood. Well, that works, right? You're talking to a business person, he's saying, where can I do this the cheapest and bring it into the market and make the most money? 10 years later, they're sitting there and the Chinese economy's taken off and the Chinese are keeping the seafood they're growing. The Brazilians are out competing us on the Chilean salmon. And all of a sudden the seafood industry is going, we can't source our product now. So where are we going to get it from? And all of a sudden that 65 cents a pound becomes enough of an incentive for them to want to invest here. So aquaculture, this is the phrase we use, helping to feed a hungry world. And I'm going to talk about our replenishment program first, and I'll touch on Rose Canyon Fisheries. And if you've got a question, please just shout it out while I'm going, because I'll lose my voice in a couple of minutes anyway. So, I was here a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about working waterfronts. One of the things we have to keep in mind here is that if we're going to farm the ocean, we have to have infrastructure on shore, because we live here, okay? This is where we're going to eat the seafood. But if it's growing out there, we got to be able to move feed and cages offshore. We need to be able to bring the product back in. So we can't lose our waterfronts. But when you look at our economy in the U.S., the help, 45% of the GDP of the 14 coastal counties in the U.S., 14% of the coastal counties in the U.S. produce 45% of the GDP with over 3 million jobs. I'm not going to read all. By the way, this will be posted, right? So just listen, don't take notes. Okay, you guys can look this up on the website. So, in 6 economic sectors, and you've seen 4 of them presented here, $282 billion in GDP contribution and 2.8 million jobs. And the major ones, tourism, 70%. And then oil, the offshore minerals, 37% of the, 70% of the, 34% of the GDP, 37% of the ocean GDP is blocked. So right there you've got well over half of our economy in the coastal zone being taken up by tourism and oil development. But remember, there's a lot more to it than that. Is anybody here a native Southern California? Okay, I grew up in San Diego. My wife went to Point Loma High School, and she went to school with the tuna fishermen. All the kids that went to high school with her, their dads were out fishing all the time. 40,000 jobs in Southern California between Long Beach, San Pedro, and San Diego. 40,000 jobs, 16 canneries, all gone now. All those jobs are now in the Western Pacific. This is what the commercial landings of California look like now. 256 million of ex-vessel value and 165,000 metric tons. And by county, up in Eureka, they're catching what? They're catching Cancer Magister, Dungeness crab. Lots of value, not all that much tonnage. Down here, you guys are catching squid and sardines and anchovies, that sort of thing. Lots of volume, maybe not as much value per kilogram. Down in San Diego, former tuna capital of the world, 1,000 metric tons a year. That's what one tuna boat would bring in on one trip. So So all of a sudden we changed from the tuna capital of the world, the fishing capital of the world, now to like an afterthought. And the vast majority, over half of that $8 million value is lobsters. So, Christy touched on this a little bit. This was published in Bloomberg a while back. This is the projection globally, our supply, the difference between our supply of seafood, that's aquaculture as it is now, and commercial fishing, assuming that we can sustain what we've got over the long term. By the year 2030, 50 million metric tons more is what we'll need globally. North America isn't nearly that much, but the point is that's a lot of production, and it's equal now to the production by aquaculture, which means aquaculture is going to have to double in the next, what's that work out to, 20, 30, 15 years. Good luck. This is what's going on. We have the largest EEZ, the largest exclusive economic zone of any country in the world. And the FAO reports it's not only the largest, it's also got the largest amount of area suitable for aquaculture development offshore. That's the distance, that's the bottom that's within deeper than 100 feet and shallower than 300 feet, and with adequate current, and within 25 miles of a port. So we have the largest potential of any country. Of the top 13 producers in aquaculture, we've got the largest potential of any country, and yet we're at less than 500,000 metric tons, which is less than, not quite 1/3 of what Bangladesh produces in aquaculture. So, and most of ours is catfish in the southeast, warm water. Now, let's compare that in California. I'm going to jump around a little bit. I talk about a global problem, but you think globally, you act locally. I heard that somewhere. You can write that down. So, California, largest agricultural economy anywhere in the U.S. And agriculture is the biggest economy that we have in the U.S. It employs more people, it generates more. So California alone, 400 commodities, 43 billion in ex-farm gate sales. That's what the farmer gets. 81,000 farms. About 12 billion of that comes from livestock. And it's a mix, you got honey, milk and cream, turkeys, things like that. But aquaculture, 54 million out of 12 billion, it's less than 0.5% of the livestock production. And yet, across the board, the responsible environmental community recognizes that aquaculture is by far the most responsible approach for producing animal protein for human consumption. Far better than harvesting it, and far better than any terrestrial analog we've got. And we could spend a whole lecture on why that is, but leave it to say that a fish doesn't fight gravity, a fish doesn't fight temperature, it floats, it swims, and it's very conservative in its protein conversion. The other big advantage too, and I think Christy touched on this too, is what's the biggest news that we've had in this state as far as the agricultural economy goes in last year? It's been the drought. Okay? What happens to these 81,000 farms when there isn't enough water to feed the farm? I live in San Diego, East County there is full of avocado trees. Guess what? They're all turning brown now. Guys are just letting these trees die because they don't have the water to water. But we grow fish offshore, it doesn't take any fresh water to do that. So these are our facilities. We've got our main facility, our main headquarters, which has a modest aquaculture capacity. We do a lot of nutrition work there. Our veterinary pathologist, epidemiologist is there. A couple of our nutritionists are there. And that's in the old Atlantis restaurant next door to SeaWorld. Then we have the Leon Raymond Hubbard Junior Marine Fish Hatchery in Carlsbad. 20,000 square feet, that's where we run our replenishment program. And then we have this is a system that we put, and I'll describe a little bit later, out at Catalina Island on the backside. And the idea was, why don't we see if we can grow white sea bass to a marketable size? Now, a normal white sea bass being caught has to be 8 pounds. It's about 5 years old, about 28 inches long. But if it's cultured, why does it have to be that big? You're making it that big so it can go out there and make sure it reproduces before you catch it. But if you're farming it, and you harvest it at 18 months and it weighs 1 kilo or 1.5 kilos, and somebody wants to eat that, why not have a farm? So we put this system out there. We had 97% survival. the fish grew grew to over a kilo in 18 months. And we tried test marketing. We gave it to guys. They said the flavor was fantastic. They loved it. It wasn't quite as gamey as a wild fish. That was one comment they made. But then some of the wholesalers, we didn't sell it, we just gave it to them. They said, don't bother us with it right now. We've got, there's lots of white sea bass coming in the fishery. The fishery's about 6 weeks long. After the 6 weeks was over, we started getting phone calls. Got any more of that cultured white sea bass? Because, we can't source the product now because the fishery's closed. So, that's one of the big advantages of aquaculture. You want it on the dock, you want it on Tuesday, you go out and get it from the cage Monday. You don't have to take a boat out 3 weeks ahead of time and go looking for it. So, Ocean Resources Enhancement and Hatchery Program. This is something that the recreational fishermen came up with. They said, hey, we can go out and make sure the salmon aren't going to disappear by building hatcheries. Why can't we do that with white sea bass? I was just out of graduate school. I didn't know any better. If I had known better, I probably would have said you can't do it. But anyway, we tried it. It's been working. So we've been working with the recreational fishing, the Department of Fish and Wildlife. The ORHAP goal is to evaluate the economic and ecological. You can read this stuff anyway. But the idea is, how do we do that with the objectives of producing healthy and vigorous fish, environmentally appropriate manner, genetically similar to wild fish, mark all the fish so we can quantify the benefit, and then determine level of enhancement that's required to meet the goal. So, as we're developing these protocols that allow us to do that, and I'll run through some of them, it also becomes obvious that these very same protocols that we're using to grow fish for replenishment can be used to grow fish for commercialization. We're domesticating the fish. And Christy said, it takes 3 years. It does take a long time to learn how to do this for a particular species. What's neat about it is if you've done it with one, it's sort of like you learned how to make pizza, now you're going to learn how to make a chocolate cake. You still need flour, you still need water, you still need a kitchen to do it in, but you've got all that in place. So it's a new recipe, in other words. So each new species is a new recipe. A lot of them are, when you change them over from a copepod to a rotifer to an artemia or that sort of thing will change. What's the ideal temperature when you switch temperatures, that sort of thing changes. But the point is, you need clean water, you need live feeds, you need tank space, you need environmental control. And if you've got a kitchen that can do that, you can start doing it with a lot of species. So this is why we picked white sea bass. Back in the 50s, they were catching, the commercial catch in metric tons was 500-600 metric tons, and the sport fishermen were catching upwards of 50,000 fish a year, and then we just see this plummet down in the 60s, and then when the hatchery opened up, we start seeing this build back up again. And I'll just run through some of the steps. This is the kitchen, so to speak. Broodstock. These are the adult fish from which we get the eggs that we make the little fish from. So we have environmentally controlled tanks. These are 20 feet in diameter. Think of them as just a giant aquarium. And outside of the tank is the sump. The water flows by gravity out of the sump into traps where the eggs are caught. So they'll spawn at night for us. You come in the morning, there's 3, 4, 5 million eggs in there. You take those traps out, you rinse the eggs off, and I'll show you what we do with them. Put the trap back in, and they may do it again the next night. And they'll do that during the spring and the summer. So to make sure, remember, we want these fish to be as genetically variable as the wild population. So one of the advantages we have as white sea bass is one large population off the coast. It's not like salmon, where this stream's different from that stream, and this river's way different from that river. And Oregon salmon are a lot different from Alaska salmon, even though they're the same species. So what we want to do is make sure that we don't over-represent any singular genotype. So that means we need at least 120 broodstock. We have 200 broodstock. We break them into 4 groups, spawning at different times of the year, and then we rotate fish between the groups, and we bring new fish in, so there's as much mixing as we can get. So you have, by the way, when we first built our model, we built it on the idea of fish are monogamous, one male and one female, they go out and it doesn't work that way. It's like free drink night at Club Med. It's exciting. Anyway, sorry, I let a little insight on myself. I should be careful. Anyway, so what we have here is photoperiod, the day length in yellow, temperature in blue. So what happens is day length's at 10 hours and we bring it up to 14 hours. We bring temperature from 14 degrees up to 18 degrees. And look what happens, these red lines are spawns. When they start thinking the day's getting longer and the water's getting warmer, what do they think? God, it's springtime. Their thoughts turn to romance. All of a sudden the drinks come out, the bees disappear, and it's happy time. So you get spawns starting in June, you get spawns starting in February, you get spawns starting in January. So if you put all these red lines together, what do you have? You've got 12 months of spawning through the year, which is what you want. You don't want just one crop of white sea bass. If you're going to have a farm, you want crops coming out every month. And then the eggs float. The eggs are about 1/10 of an inch in diameter, about 2 millimeters. That means there's about 550 eggs per mil, or 500,000 eggs per liter. So what you're looking at here is probably over 1 million eggs in each one of these graduated cylinders, and that's all from one spawn. Probably multiple females with a whole bunch of males. I'll leave the visualizations to you. So, larval rearing. We've got to do what Mother Nature was doing, but Mother Nature does it by the eggs get out there and they're floating around, and for a couple of days then they hatch out, and a couple of days after that the yolk sac is absorbed and the mouth parts form and they're ready to feed. Well, they're not in an estuary, they're in a tank system. So we have very clean water, UV sterilized, ozone sterilized, perfect temperature, and then we put in a lot of Artemia nauplii to feed them. And the Artemia nauplii is enhanced with omega-3 fatty acids. So they're in here for a couple of weeks until they start able to move. Typically in here, they're just moving around with the currents. So the food's got to bump them in the face before they're going to eat it. After a couple of weeks, they're ready to move around, go forage. So that's when we move into larger pools. This is the Artemia hatching. This is brine shrimp, sea monkeys. This is the first instar hatched out brine shrimp nauplii. That's a rotifer, somewhat smaller. Where the advantage we have with the white sea bass is when they hatch, their mouth parts are large enough they can eat brine shrimp. So we don't have to culture the smaller rotifers. We have other species we work on, like halibut and yellowtail. We need the rotifers as a first feeding. So then we ship them over into pools where they get more and more Artemia. They're larger pools. They move around. They start swarming up, schooling, and then we adapt them over to artificial feeds or pelleted feeds. And it's that point when they wean. They're about 6-7 weeks old. They move over fully onto a pelletized diet, and they go into what we call the nursery phase, which is they're a juvenile fish now. They're schooling like crazy, and it's just a matter of putting weight on them. So what we did originally in the reef was from the hatchery went to raceways, and the raceways went straight out into the water, 4-inch fish. Then we started looking at, well, let's make the fish bigger. We started using pen systems, so we started using larger pen systems. So think about what would make an industry work. Does everybody have to have their own hatchery? Or would it be a good idea to have a centralized hatchery that produces juveniles for a lot of different companies? That way the companies can work on growing the fish out and bringing them to market, and then the high-tech aspect of it can all be done in place. And this is how chickens are done now. Tyson goes out, they give a farmer X number of chickens and some feed, and they come back 2 weeks later and they expect to have the chickens back. They take them, process them, give them a whole new batch of chickens to work with. So all of our fish, because we're trying to monitor their survival in the wild, get a coated wire tag in their cheek muscle. This is the eye. So right in the muscle bundle behind the eye, this is the orbicular flap here. You'll see the coated wire tag, and this is what the tag looks like if you look at it under a microscope. And that's it, sitting on the finger. So the idea here is each fish gets injected with one of these. They're kept until they're large enough. We move them out of the hatchery into the cages somewhere else. We've worked out how to do the transport. Again, I mentioned centralized hatchery, going to multiple farms. You need to work on this kind of technology. You have to have this skill set. So, grow out. This is to get them to the larger size before they're released. We found that if we keep the fish in a cage instead of releasing them directly, the survivability doubles. simply because it's gentler environment when they're released. They're adapted to that water body that they're in. They've had weeks or months to adapt to it. And so they just do better that way. So this is the location of our cage systems. Our hatcheries here in Carlsbad, we've got cages in all these landings up and down the coast. And here's a mix, and this is the backside of Catalina. This is the larger one at Catalina I mentioned, Marina del Rey, Channel Islands Harbor. And most of these are operated by volunteer recreational fishermen that want to be a part of the program. So we give the fish and the feed, and they provide the labor, keep the tanks clean, grow the fish. Our veterinarian goes up, make sure they're all healthy. A fish and wildlife veterinarian comes and certifies them as healthy before they're released. So releasing the tag juveniles, as I said, we can release them from here. We can let them out of the cages like the guys are doing here. Tag recovery program, we have a fisheries dependent system where we look at the recreational and the commercial landings. And we also have a fisheries independent where we go and do our own sampling using small gill nets. And then a poor graduate student has to go through a lot of fish heads looking for tags. That's why God gave us graduate students. And we've learned a lot. I mean, does anybody know how fisheries are managed? Basically, you develop natural history tables. You understand how fish survive from one year to the next. And it's all based on growth rate. The faster you grow, the more likely you are to survive. But in managing white sea bass, we never had a good model. The only model we had was based on measuring the rings of scales from a study done in the 1930s. We went actually and got the ear bones out, the otoliths, sectioned them, and because we had tagged fish and untagged fish, we knew exactly how old the tagged fish were, so we were able to ground truth the age of the fish exactly based on the number of rings. And so that gave us a much more reliable curve than now the fisheries model can be based on, okay? So, and then we also track them sonically. We actually surgically implant them with these little beeper tags, these little pingers, and we can track them actively by boat using a directional hydrophone. This is the output of the laptop that's on the boat that feeds from this thing, or we have buoys that record when the animals go by. And we put those in different places, recover them, download the data, and we know when they moved in or out of the bay. This is a tracking, this is where our main laboratory is here, and you can see how this animal moved around this part of the bay for several hours. So, where are we in the program now? We're under a 2-year Sea Grant sponsored review. One of the things they want us to start considering is other species. The ones in green, this is the list in order that we got from the Department of Other Species. Actually, the white abalone is endangered. I don't know, that actually should be much higher on the list. But these ones in green are all species that we've already spawned and worked with. We've already put them in our kitchen, so to speak, and worked out some of the techniques anyway. The halibut we can do very easily. Giant sea bass is going to be a little tougher. Sheephead, we have a big problem with getting their air bladders to inflate properly. Cabezon, really interesting fish. Anyway, but there isn't any fish we can't learn how to culture. It's just a matter of whether it makes sense to do it or not. That's what it will come down to. So, we did our commercialization studies, Catalina in 98 to 2000, and then in Mexico we worked with, what's the tuna farm in Punta Bandera? No, the other side of the pool. No, the Maricultura del Norte. So we put fish down there and we compared 2 different kinds of cages, a surface cage versus one of Christy's submersible cages. And we did environmental monitoring, health monitoring. We put striped bass down there, and they just grew like gangbusters. Next thing we know is everybody wants to grow striped bass in Mexico. So this is us transporting some fish down there. This is the sea station out here, and then we used one of these smaller cages inshore. What we found is they grow just as well in either one. These are a little bit easier to take care of. And then this is the sea station, the aquapod. This is a normal salmon style surface cage. And they're used for tuna farming. This is a tuna operation where they go and catch the tuna, They put them into the cage, then they drag the cage back to the farm. So they take the cage to where the tuna are, load them into it, and then drag the cage back. So rose caving fisheries, again, the idea is we can make the fish this big and let it go, let Mother Nature do the rest of the work. Why don't we just keep it in a cage longer, make it this big, and then put it directly in the market? The big difference being, of course, if you put 1 million fish out there that are this big, if you get 100,000 back in the fishery, you're lucky if you got 10% of them. You put 1 million of those guys in a cage, you'll get almost 1 million of them back out. So, the project itself, commercial state-of-the-art offshore aquaculture project, up to 5,000 metric tons of production, excess sales annually of $50 million with an estimated 2 to 1. I've got more detail on that. Species we're looking at is the yellowtail jack, or California yellowtail, the white sea bass, striped bass. These are all species that we've got culture capability on. We also have the California halibut, but it doesn't make sense to grow halibut in a cage. They're all sitting on the bottom, kind of looking up. Doesn't, not really using the depth of the cage. So, what's neat about San Diego, what's neat about Southern California in general, is we've got a Mediterranean climate. We don't have hurricanes. We don't have 40-foot seas. We've got temperate climates. We've got, you know, if the guys are out there in January, they're, you know, and they're not wearing, well, they got to wear float coats and everything, but the point is it's not January in Iceland. And if you look at the Mediterranean itself, all of these push pins represent farm operations in the Mediterranean. So all 16 countries bordering the Mediterranean do commercial farming. This is a European sea bass, which is the primary species they're growing. And what kind of really brings the message home to me about why we need to do this is one of these guys, a branzino, or a European sea bass, grown in the Greek islands for sale in La Jolla at $12.99 a pound. Flown 7,000 miles to come into our market. Now, why are we flying a branzino from Greece, sustainably grown in Greece, to La Jolla, when we, you know, 7,000 miles when we can get one from the ocean 4 miles out at sea and then bring it in and put the jobs here instead of in Greece? Carbon footprint. When people talk about sustainability, it isn't just about what's going on here. It's about the entire supply chain that goes on. So, here's the location. I'll tell you a little bit about why we selected this site. We were looking for an area where traffic was minimized. We talked to commercial and recreational fishermen. Nobody's fishing in that area. We talked to NOAA about essential fish habitat. No issues there. Sandy bottom. We looked for an area that basically wouldn't interfere with other operations. This is Christy mentioned the grid system down in Panama. This is what the grid would look like. 2 by 12 cages, 2 of them set up eventually. And the reason that you want to max out at 300 feet of depth is you use a 4-to-1 scope. So for every foot of depth, you've got 4 foot of run. So for each one of these lines here is 1,200 feet long. So you have a very small cage surface area involved, but you're using a fairly large footprint, which is mostly inert. It's just rope and anchors, but it takes a lot of space to moor one of these things. So this is where we have kind of the cart and horse situation in this country. The Science and Technology Council Committee of the Interagency Working Group on Aquaculture, which was established by the Aquaculture Act of 1980, came up with research priorities, strategic plan for research goals for aquaculture. Now, these are all great, but there's no industry that needs these solutions yet. So that's what I meant by the cart and horse. I think it would make a lot more sense to have an industry that actually has problems that need to get solved so you can define the scope of these things and get them a lot more specific. Okay? Why work on a disease treatment for a fish species that's not even in culture yet? Why say you want to develop diets if you don't have a species that requires that diet to be developed for it? And these are all, diseases are species specific, diets are species specific. But I would make the argument that by having a commercial operation, the scope of what we're proposing, it will make addressing those issues, it'll give them substance, it will give them base, it will give them direction. And these are the collaborative folks that we're already working with, environmental effects, nutrition, fish health, and then working with the economic community for social interaction. And they're having a lot of tools that have been developed. And really what we're trying to do is apply those tools. For example, the CAPES program, Coastal Aquaculture Planning and Environmental Sustainability. NOAA's National Ocean Service has developed a program that says, okay, if you're going to put the cages here, what's that going to look like from the shoreline? So they go out and they verify everything. This is not what it will look like. It would actually, when the simulation is run, if you're standing on the beach at Mission Beach, inshore where our cages are going to be, and you're looking out 4.5 miles, you can't see anything. It's below the curvature of the earth. So that kind of tool is really valuable to help people ease their minds. We're talking about disease. We're going to have disease problems. Guarantee it. You can take 100,000 people in any grouping you want randomly, and you're going to have a few of those people that aren't going to be healthy on any given day. So you've got issues you need to deal with, but it's complex. It's not just because the disease organism is there, it's because there's physiological stress because you allowed water quality to go down, or you let that water quality went down because CO2 went up, or O2 went down, or ammonia went up. These are all interactive factors. It's a dynamic process. Basically, it comes down to healthy animal, healthy environment. The pathogen has the least opportunity to be causative in a health issue. But when you do have a problem, you need to jump on it. You need to find a causative agent. You need to find diagnostic tools, and you need to figure out treatments. This is a problem we ran into with a pretty nasty little virus that we ran into back in the 90s called nervous necrosis virus. These little viral cells here would cause these vascularizations in the brains of the larvae, and the larvae would spin around and die in the span of a couple of days. Once you got it in the system in your hatchery, you basically kill everything, sterilize, and start over again. There's no immune response to this thing. And what our concern, of course, was, well, we don't want to be culturing fish and putting them out in the ocean if they're carrying this heinous disease. Well, the point is they die, so you don't have to worry about releasing them, but you don't want to be the focal point or the starting point for disease. So we, working with UC Irvine, they developed what's called NIFAD, an immune fluorescent antibody test. It basically lets you look at the tissue of a fish and see if they've ever been exposed to that particular virus. So we went out and looked at the wild population, looked at the brain tissue of a lot of wild fish, and we found, oh, they've already been exposed to it. Just the same way that a lot of us have been exposed to a lot of viruses. We've developed an immune response to it. The point with this is we had a specific species, we had a specific problem, and then we brought the resources to bear on it. You couldn't try to find a solution without having an application for it on the front end. So, modeling potential impacts. There's a lot of work's been done on this. What's our farm going to do to the environment? So, Jerry's involved in this program. This is a collaborative program that takes a look at existing models that are used for siting farms in Scotland, and models that have been used to allow salmon operations in the U.S. to operate more efficiently and more cleanly, and we've applied it to our open ocean application. And it involves the metabolism of the fish, the water column, the water currents, all these hydrographic and environmental issues and metabolic issues, and the metabolism of the sediments as well. And what it basically does is it looks at different levels of production in the currents and the depths that were there. So we actually go out and measure that. We have a acoustic profiler where we put out there a current profiler, and it gives us data that feeds back into the system. And basically what it's producing, what it's suggesting is that the peak total organic carbon within the footprint of the farm will be 0.0062 grams of carbon per gram. So basically a change of less than 1% of the background carbons. You can't even measure that difference. So basically, and they ran the simulation at 10,000 tons, twice the production that we're suggesting. Now, that's not to say we know that's going to work. So we're going to grow the farm from 1,000 to 2,000 to 3,000 to 5,000 tons over time and validate the model as we're going. We had 2,000 and this isn't true, and it turns out there's a lot of excess carbon on the bottom, or algal blooms, then we don't grow anymore. We've hit the peak. Okay? So, marine spatial planning, you've heard this, probably heard this term a lot. The folks at the Bren School of Santa Barbara had a grant from Sea Grant to take a look at marine spatial planning in the Southern California Bight. So we started working with them. We gave them the siting criteria that we would use, and they came back and made predictors. These green areas are areas you shouldn't use. The brown ones are good for fish. The purple ones are good for mussels, and then the, what color is that? Kind of gray area is good for either. So this is where we're proposing of our farm. We actually moved it, and it's now down here. The point is that this doesn't give us permission to move ahead. We go, hey, we stuck it in the gray section, but it does give us the opportunity to turn around and go, look, we can do this here. How big could this industry get? So this is the projection from Point Arguello down to the Mexican border. And all of these, this is over 500 square kilometers of area that would be suitable for aquaculture development. So how big an industry could that be? Well, that's the economics of our particular program. We have the San Diego Regional Economic Development Corporation run an economic projection. We're going to support over 300 seafood jobs. 72 jobs directly on the farm. The rest of them will come from upstream, downstream, direct and indirect job creation. It'll be 6 to 10 times the current value of what's landed commercially in San Diego. About $8 million on this, could be upwards of $50 million a year. $50 million in total economic impact annual. We'll pay over $90 million in taxes over 10 years. It'll be $100 million annually in new spending. This is one farm. So, what would it take to take this to the next level and talk to the U.S.? Has anybody seen the, I'm sorry, your Science in the Sea, your globe thing?
Science on Spirit.
Okay, Science on the Spirit. You guys seen the aquaculture thing? Okay, it's got a little thing on there that shows Vermont. I don't know how we're going to get the ocean into Vermont, but like, Jerry will work on that. He'll get back to that. But the point is, if we wanted to grow all the seafood we needed for the U.S. in a year on an annual basis, back of the napkin calculations, you got 320 million people. You saw Christy talking about how much people are, we're eating 6.6 kilos each. Other countries eat 14, 15, 20 kilos. Okay? So we don't really have that huge a demand. We're the largest importer because we're not producing it ourselves. But we actually don't eat all that much seafood. So that means U.S., we eat total of a little over 2 million metric tons a year. And figure, we don't eat the shells of the oysters. We don't eat the heads of the fish. So figure a 40% yield, you need over 5 million metric tons. So using cages similar to what we would use. What's the actual volume that would be needed to do that? 20 kilograms per cubic meter harvest density in a 10 meter deep cage would require that we need about 26 square kilometers. Now what did I just say? California had 500 square kilometers. 26 would grow all the seafood that the U.S. needs. At $6 a kilo ex-vessel value, $32 billion in sales a year. Double that, at 43 jobs per 1,000 cubic meters, or metric tons of production, that's over almost 250,000 jobs. A whole new industry for the nation just by becoming self-sufficient in our seafood production through aquaculture. That's what 10 square miles looks like in the Southern California Bight. Now, of course, we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't have one 10-mile square cage up. But imagine this spread over 20 farms beyond the view. And if you have an industry that large, maybe we don't have to be limited to 300 feet. Maybe we can go out in deeper water.
Does the footprint you were describing there take into account all the entire infrastructure
No,
required?
it's just that's where you jump from 10 square miles to the state of Vermont.
Oh, okay.
Okay, you got to put the kit or apart, you got to put the moorings in, but the point being that this is the actual volume of the ocean you would use in culturing the fish. Just 10 square miles basically coming down to 100 cubic miles is what I know. 10 square miles, 10 meters deep. But that we spread over a region of the U.S., the Gulf, East Coast, Hawaii, they would all have farms. They would all be growing species that are common to that area. And one of the things to keep in mind is we're responsible, I mean, we don't grow salmon here. I mean, we can catch salmon, but we get our salmon from farms or from wild catch fishermen up in the Pacific Northwest. What about the guy in Iowa? You know, he's got a right to eat seafood too, so we've got to get him his fair share. So we're growing seafood not only for ourselves, but for all the other people east of us. So, is this the answer? Mexico thinks so. We have some friends here up from Magdalena Bay. They've got a yellowtail farm down there. These guys have got it figured out. They've got the permitting process figured out. I'm spending 2 years of my life trying to get permits to do something everybody says we ought to do. Where's the logic of that? Mexico, just we go do it. You know, go do it. So we're developing these marvelous technologies, but the only people that want to use them are our neighbors to the south. And where do you guys want to sell your fish, by the way, primarily? Right back up here. Okay, so all due respect, love you to death, but you know. So last February, Catherine Sullivan, the administrator for NOAA, was at the CWEP conference in New Orleans. Her statements: aquaculture provides year-round living wage jobs. Marine aquaculture operators support working waterfronts. Remember what I said? We can't just all be, I'm looking out here and it's beautiful. It's really gorgeous and everything. But they can't all be Bubba Gump restaurants. You know, we need to leave some space for the fishermen to come in. We need to have these working waterfronts. The U.S. industry struggles because of regulatory uncertainty. We're not talking about animosity on the part of them. We're talking about guys that go, I don't really know how to permit something like this. It's not a negative thing. It's just a lack of experience. And that's really more than anything else. I'd love to say I'm out here pioneering this new technology that's going to feed the world. The reality is I'm just trying to get permits. I'm just using technology we already know how to do. We've stolen from other people too. We're using the examples they're using down in Mexico as a demonstration, and we're just trying to get the permits so we can create the industry here. Last comment she made is, let's start using more of this U.S. developed technology and expertise here and stop exporting jobs to other countries. Here. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Don, Christy said it's a 10-year process to get the permits. How many years are you into that yet?
The first approach we took on this was probably back in the mid-90s, and we looked to take an offshore oil rig off of Ventura, turn it into a hatchery, and then have cages associated with that. We're only proposing a 300-ton operation. And back in probably 2008, 2009, we proposed what we're proposing now, a larger operation, a couple thousand tons. And I met Christy 2 years ago when she came up. She had this farm in La Paz, but she didn't have any fish to put in it. She had shrimp, she had in her aquapods. And we talked to her about doing tutuapa, how it's similar to white sea bass. And then they came back to us and said, we've heard about what you guys tried to do before. Can we exploit that, try it again? It's not very often you'll run into an investor that's willing to, and God, I hope that you're still willing to do this, willing to put the kind of money and time forward to make this happen. And in my mind, what we're really trying to do here is demonstrate something that will create the capacity for a new industry. Not just, to make money, but really to take pressure off wild fisheries, to give the seafood industry a new paradigm for seafood production, to make more jobs here, and that will really pave the way for a sustainable industry that doesn't have adverse impacts on the environment. It grows food in the way that, according to our standards, instead of relying on however they're going to do it in Taiwan or Nicaragua or anywhere else. So it's been a lifelong thing for me. I've been working at this for 30 years, this particular project, at least 10 in a year and a half on the permitting for this. Yes, sir.
Well, you mentioned that your efforts to preserve genetic diversity of white sea bass. It sounds like you're deliberately trying not to domesticate the fish. What happens if it does become an industry and they're
Well, think of it this way.
I mean, we already heard about some of those efforts. Is that a good thing?
Well, if I'm purposely growing 100,000 white sea bass to put out in the ocean, I don't want to I want those fish to be as diverse as the wild population. But if my intent, using almost the same techniques, but if my intent is to take those 100,000 fish, grow them to 1.5 kilos, and then bash them in the head and eat them, I don't much care what their genetics look like as long as they taste good. So what we need to do is, while we're working with genetically diverse fish, demonstrate that escapement really isn't a problem. This technique is, I mean, we grow Atlantic salmon in Puget Sound, and yeah, some fish have gotten out, but they don't reproduce, they don't hybridize with Pacific salmon, and they don't take, so to speak. They don't invade that habitat. If we can grow white sea bass for a couple of years, and none of them escaped, then why not interbreed them? Why not create a family infrastructure and breed for the fastest growing, the most disease-resistant fish? The same way we do with chickens. I mean, the chickens we grow here might be different than chickens they grow in Minnesota because it's colder there. Or the cattle that we have. We grow different strains of animals for different locations or for different temperaments, whatever we want to breed for. And if you think about what's really going on in evolutionary genetics, inbreeding on an animal doesn't make it so much of a threat to wild populations. If it gets loose, it kind of eliminates that threat because you've outbred the capacity for that animal to survive in the wild. I know that's
I follow you.
it's a hard concept. I use the guys that have heard me talk before, you know, my wife loves her standard poodles, but all breeds of dogs come from one parent strain of wild dog. I forget what is it, Wolves or what? I don't know, Annis, whatever. The point is if those poodles get thrown in with a bunch of wolves, we're not going to get a bunch of cute, fuzzy wolves. You're going to get some tufts of fur and some really well-fed wolves. Because the poodles aren't really designed to survive. They're designed to try to get up on my bed and give me grief every morning. Like that. So that's what they're bred for. The wolves are bred for surviving in the wild. The poodles aren't. So what we really want to do is inbreed these guys to the point where they wouldn't survive if they got out. And so you've got an animal that's great in culture, but no good in the wild. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
With your examples with salmon, with wolves, with chickens, with cattle, you have something that you don't have with finfish. With finfish, many of them you have broadcast spawners. Is there any concern if we end up domesticating these finfish that the spawning might become an issue?
Well, like the white sea bass don't reach a point where about half of them become sexually capable at 3 years. If you're going to eat them at 2 years, not an issue. Same with most of the species you work with. So, and then even the striped bass, what's great about striped bass is that's an anagamous species. So it's only wants to spawn in freshwater. You grow it in seawater, unless it runs up to the Sacramento River, it's not going to have enough water to spawn in. Anything else? Yes?
Why did you go to the offshore operation instead of going on our own land facility?
Because I think it's, for our on-land, we use a lot of recirculation technology in our hatchery, because when we bring water into the facility, we have to clean it, and it's a lot easier to clean water we've used once when you're growing a lot of little fish than it is to clean a lot of water once, and pass through. So we use a lot of recirculation, but we still require new water. The amount of energy and filtration and capital investment you make is directly proportional to the biomass you're growing. So it makes sense to use a lot of recirculation technology when you're trying to grow a 30-gram fish to go into a cage. When you're going to grow that fish to 4 kilos and you want 1,000 tons, that's huge. It's a lot of expense, and generally you never get the water. You may be able to get the water healthy enough for the fish, but they develop a taste that just isn't really what you're looking for. So The idea here is to get the fish to a size where they're going to survive well in the cage and then let Mother Nature take care of the environment, and then don't screw her over. Don't overcrowd it. Don't create an unhealthy situation. Keep the environment clean. What farmer is going to pollute the land that he grows his crops in? That's, you know, you don't stay in business for very long if you do that. And that's what happens if you degrade the environment, you degrade your capacity. And there were some questions about profitability. I'll try to answer if you guys have any questions about that. But this farm will take anywhere from a $20 to $30 million cash commitment. And profitability won't be seen until year 5 or 6. And that's with us scaling up over time. One of the reasons you don't want to jump to 5,000 tons of production on the front end is you know you're not going to get it right the first time around. You got to learn. This is a skill set we don't have in this country. So we need to learn as we go. So we start at 1,000 tons, refine our techniques. When we're ready to go and we know it's going to work, jump up to 2,000 tons. Reinvest some of your earnings. Yes, sir.
Can you just poach investors from wineries then?
I'm sorry?
Can you just poach investors from wineries? You know, I mean, they need like 10, 15, 20 years, right?
Well, you know, there are the kinds of things that Christy was talking about is the U.S. ought to be investing in this. There's a fisheries loan program that NOAA has through the Department of Commerce. If you had a fishing operation and you wanted to, say, buy a new tender for your fleet of boats, you know, you have 20 salmon boats, you want a tender to accept the salmon, and that was going to be a $15 million investment, you could go out and borrow 80% of the value of that boat. You could borrow 80% and pay it back at 1% over prime over the life of the boat. So if you were depreciating that boat over 20 years, you're paying 1 point over prime. How are you going to use your own money? That is, you know, you can use better uses for your money operationally than investing up. That's the kind of investment that would, it's not getting the owner operator out from under. He's got to come up with 20%. He's got to make it all work. But that's the kind of investment that our government could make, securing loans to help the industry grow over time. We have, back to this cart and horse idea, having an industry like this that runs into problems means that now we have something for the universities to work on. We don't want to go to university professors and say, what do I need for an aquaculture industry? Because they don't know. They're sitting in the university and they're not growing fish. You need to get fish out there. You need to have nutrition problems. You need to have disease problems. You need to have engineering problems. So you can go back to university and say, guys, I ran into a disease problem I can't figure out. Can you help me out with that? Now you have a reason for Sea Grant and NOAA to be funding the university to solve that problem. This is how agriculture works. We have land grant colleges. We have, you know, if you have a problem with catfish, you've got 12 universities that'll help you figure it out. If you've got a problem with a chicken, you've got 20 universities that'll help you figure it out. You got a problem with a white sea bass, you're freaking on your own.
Now, don't you think that in addition to the federal government and the state government making bigger investments in aquaculture, the other thing they could do at lower cost is to do something about the permitting process. Don't compromise the standards, but streamline it, make it more transparent and more predictable. Because we know that in California, it takes a long time to get to either yes or no, and they keep dragging it out saying they want more data, they want more information, they want more studies. And most investors can't stay with it. Fruta del Mar is fortunate to have deep pockets.
Your lips to God's ears, my friend. To give you an idea, in California, I don't see this happening in coastal waters anytime soon. About 9 years ago, SB 201 was passed. It was I think they called it the Sustainable Aquaculture Act, something like that. It was written by a Senator Semidian up in Palo Alto or something. And it calls for, before anybody can get a permit to have a cage operation in coastal waters, there has to be developed a programmatic EIR, which sounds like a great idea. Basically, it says that here's all the conceivable problems we can think of. Here's the checklist. You fill out how you're going to be concerned, how you're going to answer each one of these concerns. We're 9 years into it. I haven't even seen a draft of this thing. The law says you got to have this before you can do anything. Well, catch 22. Federally, Christy listed the agencies. Section 10 permit from the Army Corps of Engineers for navigable waters, NPDES permit from the EPA. Basically, we're going to get a consistency review from the Coastal Commission. We didn't need to do that, but we asked for it because we knew they wanted to do it, and we're going to give them the opportunity. So what they say will help condition the permits, even though we're in federal waters. We got to get a registration from the Fish and Game Commission, or from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. We need to have, and then of course we need to run it under the regulatory authority that already exists. I can't give an antibiotic to a fish that hasn't been approved by the USDA or the FDA. So there's a whole bunch of regulations on how we grow food that have to be lived up to. I don't get a permit, but before I can sell the product, I have to make sure that I'm living up to those standards. So the big problem we ran into isn't though any one of those individual permits, but under federal law, the National Environmental Protection Act, I think it's called, the Policy Act, I forget which, is NEPA. And under NEPA, you have the requirement that any federal permit that requires a federal review has to be undergone this public review process. So we sent in our permit applications in October of 2014. 6 months later, the agencies came back. They apparently spent 6 months going back and forth saying, who's going to do NEPA? Army Corps didn't want to do it. The EPA didn't want to do it. 6 months, back and forth, back and forth. Finally, the EPA said, okay, I guess we'll do it, but we don't know how. So our friends at NOAA stepped up. I'd love NOAA to do it because when you look at the environmental concerns that people have, things like interference with commercial fisheries, interference with marine mammals, interactions with endangered species, it all comes, those are all NOAA's bailiwick, National Fisheries Service. So they're required to consult on it, but since I didn't need a permit from them if I wanted to grow Boccaccio, a federally managed species, or cowcod here, then I need a permit from them and they can be the lead agency. So what was holding us up on this was a lack of desire on the part of any agency to take the lead, and the agency that would take the lead didn't have to trigger their regulatory authority to do it. So if there's a single change I'd make right now, I'd give NOAA the regulatory gumption to go out, the ability to go out and be the lead agency. Get everybody else behind them. There's no leadership in the process, is what we're dealing with here. You want to go start a business somewhere, you want to build a building, you've got building codes you go live up to. You get a permit to do that. If it's in the coastal zone, you go get that. You get the fire marshal to look at it. There's a whole list of things you got to do. You want to do this, I need this permit, but who do I take it to? Who's the last voice on this? So what we're going to have now, each one of the agencies involved, Coast Guard, Army Corps, NOAA, they asked BLM, or the BOEM, Minerals Management Service, used to be Minerals Management Service, and the Navy, to all be either participating or cooperating agencies. They send them each a letter, they all send a letter back saying, yeah, we'll serve that role. Then they wanted a memorandum of agreement that everybody could sign and say, yeah, here's how it's all going to work. I'm still waiting for the letter. I got to go meet with Christy in a board meeting and do a February 18th, and I don't want to walk in there and go, well, you know, they haven't really signed it yet. And how do you get them to do it? You know, you got an agency in San Francisco, you got one in Carlsbad, you got the Navy down here. I mean, it's just all over the place. So we need somebody that goes, I'm in charge here. And it's my responsibility to make this work. I think the way to do that is you go and you amend the Aquaculture Act of 1980. And you say NOAA has lead agency responsibility for the permitting of aquaculture in federal waters in the United States. Bam. So, any other questions?
Is that going to happen?
Got it. Somebody's got to want to do it. But look, I look at this as 10 years, I'm dead in the ground 8 years, swear to God, guys, but this thing's up and running, and you can hop on a boat in Mission Bay, you can take the governor of California, you can take the head of NOAA out on a boat, and 15 minutes later they're standing next to cages with a bunch of healthy fish swimming around in healthy water. You can catch 3 or 4 of them, take them back, and give them to them for lunch. That's what we need to demonstrate how this can be done and take people's angst out of the equation. So that people go, God, why don't we have 10 more of these? Look at the jobs we created in this one. What if we had 10 more? What if we had 10 times more jobs? And until we have something like that, you're not going to have any of these agencies going, yeah, I want to own this. So,
We want to thank you, not only for tonight, but also for your leadership in trying to make this happen, because I do think it's important to the state and the nation that we're indebted to.
oh,
Now, we are.
let me get there.
Next week is our final class. We're going to have a panel discussion. We're going to have two farmers and 2 wild capture fishermen. And we're going to let them fight it out. Our goal is to try to get to a Texas consensus. That's defined as the last one standing. We hope that you'll come and be prepared with some mean-spirited questions, and we want to have a lively dialogue. So we will see you next week, and Don, thank you very much.